Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to our lesson, and let's have a review of what I've taught you before. It's all about the forms of literature, in which we have the two forms, and they are prose and poetry. And to review, prose is writing that does not have any formal structure, whereas when we talk about poetry, it is usually written in verse, and it has a form, a structure. It has rhythms and everything, and we'll know more about that. But first, class, let's talk about prose. Now, there are two kinds of prose. So when we say two kinds, it's number one, fiction, and number two, non-fiction. Fiction is from the Latin fingere, which means to form or create, is kind of prose that deals with imagination, deals with creating stories. Even if there are a lot of stories out there, sometimes you do not know what is real and what is not. So fiction is something that is not real. It can be based on historical eras and historical stories, but once you've changed something about it, you have the liberty to change something about it, it becomes fiction. For example, you tell a story about Jose Rizal and his adventures, Jose Rizal with powers and everything. That is fiction. So fiction is the product of the imagination of the writer. On the other hand, guys, let's fast forward here for now. When we talk about nonfiction, it's prose writing that represents and explains ideas and tells about real people, places, objects, or events. So when we say fiction, inimbento. When we say nonfiction, this is true story. Okay, so first let's talk about the different kinds of fiction as of this year, this generation. So the first type is short story. When we say short story, it's a brief, probably around 500 words, and it can usually be read in one sitting. There are books that's a collection of short stories, but the short story per se is just something with a beginning and an end that you can read in one sitting. It usually has a few characters only and a single plot. Next is the novel. The novel is a longer story. It's usually written in prose. It has more characters and several subplots. For example, the Game of Thrones books, it's the Harry Potter books. Those are novels. For example, your romance novels that you cannot finish in one sitting usually, those are novels. Short story, short novels, a bit longer, probably around 2,000 to 3,000 words, and the short novels are novellas. There are novellas. There are those type. But novel is a long story written in prose. Okay, now we talk about drama. Drama, see, is a narrative prose intended to be played on stage. It has a certain, it adheres to a format. Well, not like poetry, but when we say format, it's how you write it. There's characters, and then the character is speaking something, and then a part of that segment is the writer trying to describe what the character is doing, and then of course the quotes, and then the script. So drama, you probably know about this. For example, Pedro, colon, I'm here waiting for the sun. And then Maria, colon, what sun are you waiting for, my dear? So those are drama. This is intended to guide the characters and actors on stage. Okay, so let's talk about fable. Fable is a brief story, usually with animal characters that teaches a lesson or moral. A perfect example of this is the story about the turtle and the rabbit who are trying to reach the finish line. Now the rabbit runs ahead and rests before the finish line. He is very confident that the turtle, the pagong, would not catch up to him. But then the turtle went on and persevered. And so, when the rabbit was asleep, the pagong or the turtle passed him and he won the race. Okay, now let's talk about parable, which is a short narrative that is at least in part allegorical and illustrates a moral or spiritual lesson. When we say allegorical, my friends, allegorical is something, a story that has double meaning, a story that you can reflect on, and later on in life you would apply it to yourselves. Examples of parable is the parable of the prodigal son, and then the emperor's new clothes. It has something that it's saying to you. And if you want to know more about parable, there's a lot of parables in the Bible. The parable of the man sowing the seeds and stuff like that. Okay? So next we have legend, which is a story that reflects the people's identity or cultural values, usually with more historical and less emphasis on the supernatural. So the difference between legend and myth is that legend may be true or can be true, while myth is you already know that it is not true. It is people's interpretation of the stories that happened before, because myths has more supernatural, has magic, it's gods and heroes in comparison to legends. When we say legend, it is, for example, the legend of King Arthur. One in England might debate or might say that, King Arthur really existed, even though they're not sure. And there's, in comparison with myth, which is a fictional tale, when we say myth, it's all about the gods and goddesses. Let's talk about Troy. Wherein it was Achilles. Achilles was there. Achilles himself is a hero of Greek mythology, and also Odysseus. They have powers. The golden fleece. That is a myth. And it's more supernatural, where you are fighting Cyclops. You are looking for the golden fleece. And so on and so forth. Myth is, obviously not real, obviously a story, while legend is something that may really, really exist. Now, let's talk about fairy tale. Fairy tale is a story featuring folkloric characters such as fairies, goblins, elves, trolls, giants, talking animals, and a whole lot more. An example is Cinderella, who has evil stepsisters and evil aunts, and then Cinderella went to the ball of the prince via a pumpkin that turned into a carriage because of her fairy godmother. And then in the end, they had a happy ending. Disney fairy tale usually have happy ending. But you know what? The original stories of these fairy tales, a lot of them don't have happy endings, like the original story of The Little Mermaid, the original story of Sleeping Beauty. But that's another topic for another time. What we're talking about fairy tale here are the fairy tale stories of Disney. Okay, so we now move on, ladies and gentlemen, to the elements of fiction. When we say elements of fiction, these are what makes up fiction, if you are going to write a story, if you are gonna tell a story, then you have to remember these elements. The elements of every story are plot, characters, setting, point of view, and theme. Now let's talk about plot. Plot is the plan of the story. It's a sequence of action and events. Sometimes you have to do outlines before you have to do the actual dialogue or the actual story, like beats. For example, on this part of the story, the beginning of the story, Kuya J walks by a cave. And then on this next part of the story, when he's in the cave, Kuya J meets a giant. So that's the plot. Now you can summarize your plot and you'll form what we call the synopsis of the story itself. It's a summary of the plot. You know, in a lot of stories, the plot has a well-defined beginning, middle, and end. And we call this the exposition, the climax, and the resolution. Just like what your thesis papers are, your essays are. There's an introduction, and there's this introduction, and then there's this conclusion. Introduction, action, conclusion. But in stories, we're talking about exposition, climax, and resolution. And this not only applies to stories, but this applies to film as well, teleplay, screenplay, and the different TV series or movies that you watch yourself. So first, but in between, exposition, as you can see here, and then we have a rising action, then comes the climax, and then a falling action, and then resolution. So you might notice this in the movies that you're watching, in your favorite films. Let's talk about exposition. Exposition is the introduction. The reader learns about the setting, the major characters. How would you build up your character? How would you describe? Because the first time that you are building up to a character, you are gonna describe that person or that character to the mind of the reader, for the mind's eye to construct a form in his or her mind. So that's exposition. That's usually the first act of a story, first act of a film or a movie. Now, as we near the climax, we have the rising action. This is the part of the story that builds the tension through conflict. Like, tum, 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 tum. Most of the action of the plot occurs here. And here's a tip when you're writing a story. When you are nearing the climax, when you're doing the rising action, you have fewer and fewer words in each sentences. And you use words that are shorter compared to longer sentences and longer words when you are doing the exposition or you're doing the resolution. So now we move on to the climax. The climax would be the high point of the story. It's the tension of the story, the turning point of the story, where you find the twist. And then after finding the twist, we now move on to the resolution. This is the summary of the story, and this is what we call the falling action. The action and conflict that occurs after the climax it's often usually very short before we move on to the last part of the story, which is the resolution. The story is brought to conclusion and all loose ends are tied up. All things that were exposed in the exposition, they are resolved in the resolution. Because if not, what would happen? You would feel beaten. You would feel that the story is not enough. You are not satisfied. Without the resolution and only the climax, you are not satisfied. This is with the exception of the TV series, which of course has episodes after episodes after episodes. Now, if you are ending one episode with a question, with a climactic aspect, no? And it asks a question, mamamatay ba yung bida or hindi? Mamamatay ba yung kasama ng bida o hindi? Then that's what you call naman a cliffhanger. Because you are left hanging. No? There's a lot of types of resolution as well. Not just all loose ends are tied up. Sometimes we have what we call the open-ended ending, wherein there is an ending, and then you as the reader, you as the viewer, you form your own conclusion based on the information given to you by the story. So for example, Kuya J and Ate K drove into the sunset. You do not know if they met an accident, or you do not know if they were friends after. You do not know if nagkatuluyan sila as lovers. No? So that is based on your interpretation, and that is what we call an open-ended ending. Okay, next one element of fiction is the setting. You have to define this, the time and place of a story's action. If we are going to the Spanish period, what do you think? No? What is the setting? It's a setting wherein we have kalesas, we have bahay na batos, we have the prailes, and we have the sundalos. And this is very important to your story because sometimes it becomes a character. For example, your setting is Lawag City, and then you are highlighting the beauty of Lawag. It becomes a story. If you are set in Baguio City, which is of course the Paris of the Philippines, you are defining that place as part of the story. It is in itself its own character. So you are expecting it to be romantic or something. So that is the next element of fiction, setting. Okay. Next is conflict. When we talk about conflict, it is the reason the story grows in tension, as suspense it to build to a climax. What happens when there is no climax? What happens when there is no conflict in your story? Your story becomes boring. That's why you have to raise the stakes. You have to inject something disruptive in your story, and it in itself becomes exciting. Usually, it's a struggle. Going to the climax is a struggle between two opposing forces that is increased and increased and increased as it goes to the rising action, going to the conflict. So examples are character versus character, character 1 versus character 2. At first they're friends, and then what happens next is hindi na sila friends, no? They become enemies. Next is character versus nature. For example, there's this coming comet that's about to hit the earth. That's character versus nature. Also character versus supernatural. This is something imagined. Character versus the aswang, character versus the diablo. Okay? Also, character versus society, wherein the character suddenly realizes his place in society, na hindi na pala siya nababagay sa society na yon. So ano nang gagawin niya? What becomes the climax? The climax would then be him deciding to either join the society or go against the society. So that's character versus society. And lastly, we have character versus self. When we talk about character versus self, my friends, it's intrinsic. It's you talking to yourself. I mean, your old self versus the new self. Usually there comes a conflict, and then you emerge to become a better person. And that would be the resolution of the story. Okay, next is a point of view. There are basically two common points of view which a writer can tell a story. There's first person narrator, wherein you are writing, I said, I did, I entered the cave, and I see glowing eyes like capre. So you're using I. Next is the third person narrator, wherein you're feeling like you're the camera and you're telling a story about the person. Like, he dresses up and went out and found two prostitutes looming by his doorside. So you're not using I, but you're using the third person point of view. There is also a second person point of view, but let me just explain it in this video. What are the differences of first person, third person, and second person view? Kasalukuyan akong naghahanap ng mga babasahin sa internet para ipamahagi sa aking klase nang may biglang kumalabit sa akin. Nakatingin si Angel sa kanyang computer na para bang mayroong hinahanap at bigla na lang siyang bumalingkuwas. Nakatingin ka sa screen ng iyong laptop. Pagod ka na, ngunit may klase ka pa mamaya. Mayroong gumulat sa iyo. Okay, so the last element of fiction is the theme or the central insight or idea in which the story is based. Usually you're not telling the theme to the readers or to the viewers, you are making them get it. No? Mag-gets ba nila yung tema mo? That's a theme. For example, the theme is about redemption. The theme is about family, like in Fast and Furious. The theme is about unity, like in Avengers and Justice League. The theme is about revolution, like in Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. The theme is about something that you, as the storyteller, would want to tell the audience without saying it explicitly. No? It is implied. It is something that you want your readers to get. Okay? So that's the 5 elements of fiction if you are going to write a story. Which brings us now to nonfiction. Nonfiction, of course, as I've told you a couple of minutes ago, is prose writing that represents and explains ideas, tells about real people. And there's a lot of types of nonfiction as well. The first one is autobiography, from the Greek words auton and bios, which is life. So it's autobiography. It's you yourself writing about your life. In comparison, biography is it's written accounts of an individual's life. If Pedro is writing about the life of Mario, then it is a biography. But if it's Mario who's writing his own story, then it is autobiography. Now you know. Okay, so essay. Let's move on to essay. Essay is a short work of writing that treats a topic from the author's personal point of view. Essay is the most common form of literature. It's article type. It's all about your own opinion. It's the easiest form of literature to write, actually, you know? And it will be one of your assignments here as well. So there are only 2 elements for you to consider: the main idea and the paragraph. The main idea is like what are you trying to say, you know? And the paragraph is how would you say it. As long as you have these 2, you could write an essay. Essay, article. In news type, it's all about opinion. So that is an essay. If you are constructing written description of Northwestern University of Lawag City, that is an essay. If you are trying to write a point of view of an LGBT person, that is an essay. About being accused as as babaero or lalakero, and you defending yourself, that is an essay. Now we have the diary or journal. This is a book for writing discrete entries arranged by date. No. Have you ever had a diary? Or is Facebook now your diary? It's what happened over the course of a day or other periods. So that is a diary. For example, June 12, 1968. We are now going out because we will fight in the revolution. July 4, 1968. We've done it. We have liberated the people in Cagayan. That is a diary or a journal. And lastly, for nonfiction is letter. Again, let me just remind you that nonfiction is something that is true, because when we say fiction, it is not true. Letters often contains personal thoughts and opinions, but they are directed at just one person, and not just one person. You could also direct it to one person. You can have a series of letter, one person first for chapter 1, and then another person for chapter 2, no? But it's like dear I, dear Amanda, dear Cassandra, I have to tell you something very, very grave. That is a letter, no? And those are the kinds of nonfiction. And we have not just reviewed nonfiction, we have also reviewed fiction as well. So with that, probably you could start imagining or practice writing right now, because one of these days I'll be giving you an assignment on Prose, how you would impress me with your letters, and I'll be looking forward to it. With that, this ends our lecture, and have a great day.